When my father died, I thought the worst thing had already happened. I was wrong. The worst thing was sitting in a law office 9 days later and hearing a stranger read a version of my father that sounded nothing like the man who raised me. And the second worst thing came 5 years after that. A phone call, a pause on the line, and a lawyer saying my name like he had been looking for me for a very long time. Before I tell you what he said, let me take you back to where it all started. And if this story resonates with you, like and subscribe. Only if it resonates. My name is Sienna Mercer. I was 33 when my father died. And by then I had already learned one ugly truth about families. A person can be pushed out of a home long before anyone actually asks her to leave. My father, Daniel Mercer, lived in a coastal Massachusetts town called Fairhaven Cove. I lived 3 hours away in Portland, Maine, in a third-floor apartment, above a used bookstore that smelled like paper, dust, and wet wool every winter. At the time, I worked as a project coordinator for a commercial design firm. I had a decent salary, too many spreadsheets, not enough sleep, and the kind of adult life people call stable when they mean lonely but functional. My mother died when I was 11. Ovarian cancer. Fast. 1 year there were casseroles and careful voices, and people telling me I was brave. The next year there was just my father and me trying to build a life in a house that suddenly sounded too quiet. My father was not a dramatic man. He was practical. He fixed cabinet hinges before they failed. He folded receipts into labeled envelopes. He checked weather reports before road trips and topped off my gas tank whenever I came home from college. He loved me in plain ways. Reliable ways. The kind that don't sound cinematic until you lose them. He learned how to make boxed brownies because they were the only dessert I never rejected when I was grieving. He used to knock twice on my bedroom door before opening it, even when I was 12. As if privacy was a thing a person deserved and not a privilege granted by mood. He never ended a phone call without saying, "Text me when you get home." That was my father. Solid. Not warm in the theatrical sense, but safe. Then, when I was 19, he married Celeste. People always assume daughters in stories like this hated the stepmother from the start. I didn't. I was cautious, protective, maybe a little territorial. But I tried. I really did. Celeste was polished in a way that made every room around her feel slightly arranged. She wore cream-colored sweaters that never seemed to wrinkle. Her hair was always perfect. She smelled faintly of expensive perfume and hand lotion. She spoke softly, which some people mistake for kindness. The problem with Celeste was never volume. It was precision. She could say something unkind in a tone so reasonable that if you repeated it later, you sounded unstable instead of injured. Oh, Sienna is so independent. She never needs much. Daniel, you worry about her too much. She's an adult now. She's probably too busy to be included in the details. If you hear those lines one at a time, they don't sound dangerous. If you live under them for years, they become architecture. Little by little, my place inside that house changed. A framed recipe card in my mother's handwriting disappeared from the kitchen and reappeared in the hallway near the laundry room. My grandmother's yellow quilt got folded into a cedar trunk because, according to Celeste, it did not fit the room anymore. Boxes of my school things moved from the hall closet to the basement. My bedroom became the guest room, The second I graduated college, even though I still came home every other month. Nothing big enough to fight over without sounding childish. That was the genius of it. She never slammed a door in my face. She just kept moving the walls. Celeste had a son too. Julien. 2 years older than me. Handsome in a lazy sort of way. And permanently positioned as a man on the brink of something impressive that never quite arrived. If he lost a job, it was because management didn't appreciate him. If a relationship ended, it was because the woman was threatened by him. If a business idea failed, it had failed too early. Potential. That was Celeste's favorite word for him. Potential can become a family religion when nobody asks for results. Meanwhile, I had a job. Rent. Student loans. I use it Subaru. And the kind of competence people praise only when they want to stop looking at you closely. Reliable. Capable. Low maintenance. Useful. Julien was a project. I was a solved problem. Still, for years, my father and I stayed close. We talked every Sunday evening. He came to Portland once in the spring and once near Christmas. We'd eat chowder by the harbor, complain about taxes, compare local weather, and pretend I didn't notice how often he checked his phone if Celeste texted. He loved me. I know he did. That matters in this story, because there are betrayals that come from hate. And there are betrayals that come from weakness. My father's greatest flaw was not cruelty. It was conflict avoidance. He liked peace so much that he sometimes mistook silence for it. Then he got sick. At first it was just fatigue. A cough that lingered too long. Shortness of breath on stairs. He blamed age. Stress. Cold air. Anything but what it was. By the time doctors stopped using cautious words and started using direct ones, the room around my life had already changed. Lung cancer. Stage 3. There are moments that divide time. That appointment was one of them. The blinds were half open. The oncologist had a blue tie. Celeste sat with perfect posture and a legal pad in her lap. My father held a paper cup of water he never drank. And I stared at the anatomy diagram on the wall because it was easier than looking at his face while a stranger translated our future into treatment plans and statistical percentages. The year that followed was hospitals, infusion schedules, dry skin, parking garages, insurance calls, appétit de luxe, nausea, fatigue, and waiting rooms where everyone pretended not to notice one another's fear. I drove down from Portland every other weekend. Sometimes every weekend. My job let me work remotely until they didn't. I lost a promotion to a man named Chris, who was described as more available at a critical time. That phrase stayed with me. Love and duty are always expensive when institutions name them inconvenience. Celeste took control of the house, the way certain people take control of a conversation. Politely. Completely. She managed his medications. Reasonable. She coordinated appointments. Also reasonable. But she also screened his calls. Shortened my visits. Told me not to come certain weekends because he was exhausted. Then, later mentioned that Julien had stopped by with takeout and really lifted his spirits. At first I assumed confusion. Then I saw the pattern. If something was logistical, difficult, or ugly, I was included. If it was tender, intimate, or private. I heard about it afterward. One Saturday in late October, I arrived with soup from a marina restaurant my father loved. It was raining. The house smelled like peppermint tea and antiseptic lotion. My father was in the den under a blanket, thinner than I had ever seen him. His wedding ring looked loose. The skin around his eyes had gone papery, and every sentence seemed to cost him something. Celeste stepped out to take a call. For once, we were alone. He motioned for me to sit closer. I did. He reached for my hand. His skin was warm but dry, almost fragile. Sienna, he said, there are things I'm getting in order. I remember every detail of that moment because later I turned it over in my mind until it stopped feeling like memory and started feeling like evidence. The lamp glow, the ticking clock, the steam cooling over the untouched bowl of soup. I know, I said. He glanced toward the doorway, then back at me. I should have done some of it sooner. You still have time? I told him. He gave me that sad little smile people wear when they are protecting you from a certainty they already carry. There's paperwork with Pierce and Lowell, he said. That was his law firm. An old Boston firm that had handled estate planning and property matters for years. I want things to be fair. Fair. That was the word. Not equal. Not simple. Fair. My father used words carefully. I squeezed his hand. I know. He squeezed back once. Weakly. Then Celeste came in with her phone and her apology face. Daniel, you need to rest, she said gently, as if I were the thing tiring him. The moment ended. It was the last private conversation we ever had. He died 6 weeks later on a Thursday before dawn. The hospital called at 4:13 inches the morning. I was already awake. Sometimes your body knows before your mind gets confirmation. The drive from Portland was black highway. Sleet. Bitter gas station coffee. And windshield wipers beating a rhythm against the glass that sounded like panic trying to stay organized. By the time I got there, he was gone. The room was too still. Machines silent. Curtains half drawn. Winter light just beginning outside. Celeste sat in a chair beside the bed in a camel sweater and pearl earrings, dry-eyed and composed. Julian stood by the window with his phone in his hand, as if grief were something he planned to answer later. I kissed my father's forehead. It was cold in the worst possible way. Not frozen. Just emptied of return. I thanked him. I told him I loved him. I said things I cannot remember clearly now, because early grief edits itself badly. Then the practical world took over. Funeral home. Death certificates. Food trays. Parking. Neighbors. Flowers. Black coats in the front hallway. I stayed in the house for 5 days after the funeral. 5 days that taught me exactly what Celeste planned to do. She moved through those rooms like a woman assessing inherited property instead of mourning a husband. She corrected me when I called it my father's study. Our study, she said. She asked whether I really needed his old oak desk because it suited the room so well. She mentioned twice that Daniel had updated a lot of things in recent years. The second time, she looked directly at me. At dinner, the night after the funeral, with casserole turning cold in the middle of the table, she said, Daniel wanted simplicity, No conflict. No ugly surprises. I said nothing. Not because I was afraid. Because I was listening. People reveal themselves very clearly when they think grief has made everyone else too exhausted to hear them. The will reading happened 9 days later at Pierce & Lowell in Boston. 3rd floor. Mahogany conference table. Untouched water glasses. Rain on the windows. Ivora Navi. Celeste wore cream. Julian wore a suit that still had a loose thread on one cuff, because details only matter to some people when those details belong to them. The attorney was Robert Hale. Lot of 50s. Lined face. Smooth voice. The kind of expensive restraint that tells you he is used to saying difficult things in rooms where nobody dares interrupt. I expected pain. I did not expect absurdity. My father left the house to Celeste. That part I believed. There were cash gifts. Some charitable distributions. Liquidation instructions for the boat. And minor bequests to old colleagues and friends. Then came the section about his children. Child. Really. Julian was left a substantial cash distribution through a trust. I was left $10,000. And a paragraph. A paragraph saying that this gift reflected my father's belief that I had been adequately supported during life and had chosen emotional distance from the family unit for many years. I remember the physical sensation before the thought. Like the room tipped half an inch. Adequately supported. Emotional distance. Family unit. No, that was not him. Not because it was cold. Because it was abstract. My father did not talk like that. He would have said I made my own way. He would have said I had always been strong. He would have said something plain. Something human. Never family unit. Never. I asked to see the document. Hale gave me the copy with the practiced neutrality of a man who believed paper would do the convincing for him. My father's signature was there. Daniel Mercer. Dated 6 months before his death. Witnessed. Notarized. Flawless. Too flawless. During treatment, his handwriting had changed. His hand shook. His signatures compressed. Lines wavered. This one looked steadier than anything I had seen from him in months. Maybe grief sharpened my suspicion. Maybe love did. Either way, I knew. I looked up at Hale. I want a copy of the prior will. Celeste's expression barely changed. I really don't think this is the time. I turned to her. When exactly would be the time? Honey, she said softly. And I hated that word from her instantly. Your father revised things after a lot of difficult reflection. Did he? Her face cooled by 1 degree. Please don't do this here. That sentence always means the same thing. Do not expose me in a room with witnesses. I stood. My chair scraped hard enough to make Julian flinch. This doesn't sound like my father. I said, the language doesn't sound like him. The signature doesn't look right for that stage of his illness. I want every document tied to any change made in the last year of his life. For the first time, Robert Hale looked cautious instead of controlled. Not morally cautious. Legally cautious. Different thing. Celeste looked at him. Then at me. Then back at him. That was my first real confirmation. Not proof. Confirmation. Innocent people usually react with outrage. Guilty people calculate. Hale cleared his throat. You are, of course, entitled to consult counsel if you wish. Institutional language for this will be expensive. And we both know which side has more money. I survived the meeting somehow. I still don't know how. I drove back to Portland through sleet, so thick it blurred the highway signs. Halfway home, I pulled into a rest stop, stumbled into the bathroom, and threw up in the sink because grief and humiliation had nowhere else to go. That night, I spread the will on my kitchen table and read it until dawn. I circled phrases, underlined words, wrote in the margins, "This is not him. This is not him. This is not him." The next morning, I called a lawyer. Then another. Then another. The first wanted a retainer I could not afford. The second listened politely and told me that contesting a facially valid will with witnesses and notarization would be difficult without evidence of coercion or forgery. The third was more honest. "You may be right," he told me. "And still lose?" That sentence changed me. People like to imagine justice and proof as close relatives. They aren't. Sometimes they barely know each other. I spent the next 3 months trying anyway. I pulled old cards with my father's signature, requested appointment records, called Pierce and Lowell asking when the revisions had been discussed, called Hale twice. Then he stopped returning my messages. Celeste sent me one email. One, it said, "Your father was heartbroken by how distant you became in recent years. I know this is painful. But dragging his memory through conflict will only dishonor his wishes." I forwarded it to myself and never replied. Even then I knew what it was. Not communication. Documentation theater. Words crafted for future use. Julian called once too. He sounded annoyed more than anything else. "Look," he said. "I know this feels unfair, but Dad made choices." He only started calling my father Dad when money entered the sentence. That detail still disgusts me. "He was my father," I said. Silence. Then, "He was my family too." Those are not the same statement. Not even close. I hung up. By spring, I had spent thousands on legal consultations, travel, records, and hope. By summer, I was barely sleeping. By August, I understood I could destroy my own financial future, trying to prove something I knew without being able to prove it in the right format. That is one of the cruelest positions a person can be forced into. Knowledge without leverage. So I stopped. Not believing. Not remembering. Just stopped bleeding money into a system that only respects injury after it has been translated into paper. I left the $10,000 untouched in a separate account for almost a year because spending it felt like swallowing an insult. When I finally used part of it, I paid off the last of my student loans. It felt like something my father would have approved of. Then I moved to a smaller apartment, took on freelance work at night, and rebuilt my finances, one practical decision at a time. That first year after the will was not dramatic. Most suffering isn't. It was fluorescent grocery stores, microwave dinners, Sunday nights, when my body still expected my father to call. It was standing in a hardware aisle and hearing someone laugh in his register and having to leave my cart there because grief came back so suddenly I couldn't breathe. It was avoiding Fairhaven Cove for almost a year because I couldn't bear the road past the marina. Then driving there anyway on a gray afternoon in late October because some pains get tired of being obeyed. I parked 2 streets over and walked. The air smelled like salt, chimney smoke, and leaves pressed wet against the sidewalk. The hydrangeas by the porch had been cut back. The brass knocker had been polished. Through the window I could see new drapes. Cream. Of course. I stood across the street and understood something all at once. She had not only taken the house, she had settled into the story. That is the real violence of this kind of betrayal. The theft is one thing. The ease afterward is another. While you are still choking on what happened, someone else is already choosing fabric. That winter I boxed up most of my father's things. Not all of them. Some things are too small to pack because they already live in your nervous system. His old tape measure stayed in my junk drawer. A postcard he mailed me when I was 15 stayed in a cookbook. A voicemail that ended with, "Text me when you get home," stayed saved on every device I owned until technology itself refused to keep it. But the rest I packed. Cards. Photos. A wool scarf that still smelled faintly like cedar if I held it close enough and wanted hard enough. That was the year I stopped waiting for rescue. Justice and rescue are not the same thing. Justice can still arrive late. Rescue is the fantasy that someone stronger is about to walk in and make truth matter automatically. No one came. So I rebuilt. I changed jobs. That mattered more than I knew at the time. A former client recommended me for an operations role at a boutique commercial design company in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Better pay. Better hours. Smarter people. Fewer fragile men in expensive shoes. I took it. I moved. New apartment. New grocery store. New commute. New silence. People romanticize reinvention. Usually it happens in administrative fragments. A new lease. A new dentist. A new parking permit. A new email signature. A life stitched back together by paperwork. In Portsmouth, I met people who did not know my family's story. That felt almost dangerous at first. To be seen without context. Without Celeste. Without the town. Without my father's death hanging over every introduction like weather. The first real friend I made there was Maya. She worked in procurement. Smart. Dry. Observant. The kind of woman who notices when you stop finishing sentences and waits instead of filling the space. One night, after too much Thai takeout and one honest question, I told her the whole story. Not the shortened version. The whole one. She listened. Then she said, "Your stepmother expected you to disappear?" I looked at her. What? She expected anger. Maybe. A consultation or two. But what she was really counting on was attrition. That you'd be too broke. Too heartbroken. Too isolated. Or too practical to keep pushing. She was right. And hearing it, that clearly changed something in me. Not because it healed the wound, because it revealed the mechanism. Pain is harder to survive when it feels mysterious. Once you can see the machinery, you start understanding where it can break. By year 2, I had a promotion. By year 3, I was running operations for the whole company. By year 4, I had real savings for the first time in my adult life. By year 5, I bought a condo near the river. Nothing extravagant. Tall windows. Hardwood floors. A narrow balcony. Morning light across the kitchen counter. Mine. Paid for by me. No one could remove me from it with a paragraph. And still, every so often, the old wound flared. A Father's Day display, a next of kin forum, a legal show on television where everyone spoke with certainty about the clean triumph of evidence. One winter evening, while unpacking a box I had ignored for months, I found a yellow legal pad page in my father's handwriting. A list of house repairs, fence latch, boiler service. Call Pierce. That last line stopped me. Call Pierce. Not update Will. Not revise papers. Just call Pierce. I tore the page out and added it to the old folder I had kept all along. Every copy, every email, every note, every instinct I had once been told was just grief. I told myself it was not obsession. It was witness. There's a difference. Obsession wants relief. Witness wants the record to survive. By the 5th year, I had become the kind of woman people like Celeste would describe as cold because she no longer explained herself fast enough. That was fine. I no longer confused access with love. I no longer believed blood automatically meant safety. Fairhaven Cove became a place I could pass on a map without feeling pulled inside it. Then, one Thursday in early March, 5 years and 3 months after the will reading, my office line rang at 4:17 inches the afternoon. The day had already gone bad. A delayed shipment. A furious client. One employee crying in a supply closet. Another threatening to quit over software permissions. Rain needling the windows. That gray, late afternoon light that makes every office in New England feel vaguely defeated. I almost let the call go to voicemail because the number was Boston. Something made me answer. Operations. This is Sienna. A pause. Then a man's voice. Older. Controlled. Mas. Merced? Every muscle in my back tightened. Yes? My name is Andrew Pierce. I'm calling from Pierce and Lowell. I didn't answer right away. The office around me kept moving. Printers. Footsteps. Muted conversation. But inside me, the room had gone still. I haven't dealt with your firm in years. I said, I know. His tone shifted. Heavier now. I'm calling because new information has come to light regarding your father's estate. There are sentences that feel like doors opening in buildings you thought had been sealed forever. I looked down at my desk just to anchor myself. Blue folder. Coffee ring. Sticky note. My own handwriting. What kind of information? I asked. I would prefer to discuss the details in person. No. I said it immediately. Hard enough that someone outside my glass office looked up. No. You do not get to call me after 5 years and ask for trust first. You can tell me now. Or, you can send it in writing. A pause. Then he said quietly, the will admitted after your father's death may not have been the valid final instrument. My hand went cold around the receiver. I stood. Turned toward the rain-streaked window. Explain. We have reason to believe there was an earlier executed will, he said, and possible irregularities in the later submission. Irregularities. That bloodless legal word. I gripped the edge of my desk so hard my fingers hurt. What kind of irregularities? Ms. Merced. What kind? Another pause. Then, A recently deceased former employee left records that raise questions about witness procedures. Document custody. And a signature page associated with your father's file. The room blurred for a second, then sharpened. Witness procedures. Document custody. Signature page. 5 years of being told I was emotional, suspicious, unable to let go. And suddenly this. I closed my eyes. Just once. Then opened them again. Is Robert Hale still at the firm? No. One word. Heavy. Then who knew? Mace. Mercer. This is exactly why I'm asking to meet with you. I laughed once. Without humor. No. This is why you should have met with me 5 years ago. Outside my office, Maya had stopped walking. She could tell from my face that the room had changed. When? I asked. Tomorrow morning. 9. If possible. Where? Our Boston office. I almost refused on reflex. Then he said, there may also be implications for real property transfer and distributions already made. The house. Julian's money. Celeste's comfort. Everything done under the assumption the ground was settled. My throat tightened. Not from sadness. From pressure. From rage that had spent too long sitting in silence. Email me confirmation. I said, and whatever you can put in writing before then. I will. He hesitated. There is one more thing. Of course there was. The materials suggest your father may have attempted to contact someone at the firm shortly before he passed, and may have raised concerns directly. I sat down so suddenly the chair wheels jerked. The legal pad page. Call Pierce. My father had known something was wrong. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to try. I stared at the rain sliding down the window. When were you going to tell me that? In person. I swallowed. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock. And Mr. Pierce? Yes? If this turns out to be another half-truth, or another way of protecting the people who did this, I will not be quiet this time. His answer came fast. I understand. The line went dead. I kept holding the phone anyway. Maya stepped into my office and closed the door. She did not ask if I was okay. That is one reason she became my real friend. Instead, she said, "Who was it?" I looked at her, and for the first time in 5 years, I said the sentence out loud in a room that wasn't mine alone. They may have forged my father's will. Her face changed instantly. No polite skepticism. No soothing. No soft disbelief. Just focus. What do you need? I looked past her at the office. I had built a life inside. The life I had built without justice. Then back at her. And I understood with perfect clarity that the next 24 hours were going to decide whether the past stayed buried or finally learned how to speak. I barely slept that night. Not because I was panicking, because I was awake in a different way. There is a kind of wakefulness that doesn't come from fear. It comes from a locked room in your life finally making noise from the inside. I went home, pulled the old banker's box from my hall closet, and spread everything across my dining table. The will copy, Celeste's email, the bills from lawyers I couldn't afford back then, the notes I had taken after calls nobody returned, and the yellow legal pad page with my father's handwriting. Call Pierce. I stared at those 2 words for a long time. Rain tapped lightly against the balcony door. The refrigerator hummed. My tea went cold without being touched. At some point after midnight, Maya texted me, "You set for tomorrow?" I typed, "No." Then, after staring at that for 3 seconds, I sent another message. Yes, that was the closest answer to the truth. By 1 in the morning, I had made a new folder. Not a grief folder. Not a memory folder. A case folder. That distinction mattered. I made a timeline. Diagnosis. October conversation. His death. The will reading. The months I tried to fight. The yellow legal pad page. The phone call from Andrew Pierce. 5 years of pain reduced to paper clips and bullet points. It looked cleaner on paper than it had felt in my body. That always angers me. Betrayal sounds far too orderly once it is typed. I showered before dawn, dressed in charcoal trousers and a black sweater, tied my hair back, and put on the watch my father gave me when I graduated college. Simple silver face. Brown leather strap. Nothing sentimental in design. Very him. I drove to Boston in the dark. No music. No podcast. No attempt to distract myself. There are days when noise feels insulting. Pierce and Lowell was exactly where I remembered it. Same building. Same polished lobby. Same flower arrangement near reception that looked expensive enough to apologize for itself. The receptionist told me Mr. 9. Pierce was expecting me. I almost laughed. 5 years late? But yes. He was expecting me. The conference room, this time, was smaller than the one where the will had been read. Less ceremonial. More surgical. A tray of untouched coffee sat on the sideboard next to legal pads and bottled water. Andrew Pierce stood when I entered. He was older than I imagined from the phone. 70s. Maybe. Tall. Spare. Silver-haired. With the careful posture of a man who had spent decades making bad news sound measured. There was a woman with him too. Mid-40s. Dark suit. Sharp eyes. She introduced herself as Marin Cole, outside counsel retained by the firm in connection with misconduct issues related to my father's estate file. That phrase did something immediate to my pulse. Not concern. Not discrepancy. Misconduct. I sat without offering my hand. Neither of them seemed surprised. Meas, merced. Andrew Pierce said, "Thank you for coming." I didn't come for gratitude. "No," he said quietly. "I imagine not." He slid one folder toward me. Inside were copies. Memos. Los. Internal emails. A witness statement. And a typed letter signed by a woman named Beverly Sloan, a senior administrative employee who had worked under Robert Hale for more than 20 years. The first line said, "I am writing this because I can no longer live with what was done in the Mercer estate file." I didn't open it yet. I looked at Pierce. "Start talking." He nodded. About 5 months ago, the firm began an archive consolidation related to retired and deceased partners. In the course of that process, a supplemental storage box tied to Mr. Lydia Hale's files was discovered and reviewed. "Hale's box," I said, Yes? No defensiveness. Good. The box contained duplicate correspondence, execution notes, and the statement from Ms. Sloan. Since then, additional records have been located and corroborated. Myron took over. The records raised serious concerns about witness procedures, custody of signature pages, and the later instrument admitted after your father's death. I looked at her. Say it plainly. She did not blink. The evidence suggests the will admitted after your father's death was not validly executed in the form presented. Every sound in the room sharpened. The air system, the faint click of somebody typing outside the door, my own breathing. What evidence? I opened Beverly Sloane's letter. She wrote that several months before my father died, he had called the firm, personally asking to speak with a partner other than Hale. The first call had been noted but not transferred. The second had been intercepted by Hale after my father said he wanted someone to review papers Celeste had brought him. My throat tightened. Papers. Celeste had brought him. Not a theory. Not my reconstruction. His own concern. The letter continued. According to Beverly, 2 weeks later, Celeste arrived at the office alone with pages. She said my father had signed at home because he was too weak to come in. Instead of rejecting that process, or sending someone to verify proper execution, Hale instructed staff to prepare witness paperwork using an earlier administrative date connected to a different matter and to hold the file quietly. I read that section twice. Then a third time. The room felt too small. What does prepare witness paperwork mean exactly? Marin slid another document toward me. A surviving former employee has admitted he signed as a witness later. At Mr. Hale's instruction, without being present for any execution. I stared at her, meaning he never saw my father sign anything. Yes. I looked at Pierce. What about the notary? He answered carefully. The notary seal used on the later instrument belonged to an in-house notary whose commission was valid at the time. Her journal does not contain a corresponding execution entry for your father's later will. There it was. Witness problem. Notary problem. Document custody problem. My father asking for review. 5 years of being told I was emotional. Bitter. Unable to let go. And now every ugly instinct I had carried alone was being translated into institutional language. Paper. Los. Dates. They always respect pain. Once it develops a filing system, I asked the question I needed most. Is there a valid earlier will? Andrew Pierce opened the second folder. Yes. I felt the floor shift under me. Not enough to move. Enough to remember. He turned the copy toward me. Executed 11 months before my father's death. Proper witness signatures. Proper office protocol. My father left the house in trust for Celeste for life, or until remarriage. After that, it passed to me. There were liquid distributions to me. A charitable gift in my mother's name. And Julian was left a smaller, supervised trust for education or business use, with oversight. Not a lump sum. Of course. Of course that was who my father was. Fair. Not reckless. Not cruel. I kept reading until I reached an attached memorandum. Plain language. His language. I have provided for my wife. I have provided for my daughter. I do not wish any later pressure to disturb what is fair. Fair. That word again. The same one from the den. The October day, with the soup cooling beside him. I put the page down before my tears touched it. For a moment, nobody said anything. I hated that they were there to witness that part. That recognition, that relief twisted with grief. Because my father had not erased me. But he had still died inside a situation he had not fully controlled. "How long have you known?" I asked. Pierce answered too carefully. "Not long enough." That was not an answer. Marin understood that immediately. "We did not contact you until we had enough corroboration to do so responsibly." "Responsibly," I repeated. The word landed badly. Pierce accepted that. "Good. What happens now?" Marin pushed the third folder toward me. "The firm intends to support a petition to reopen the estate proceedings, disclose the discovered evidence, and recognize the earlier valid will as controlling." Support. I looked at her. "That's the word we're using." Her expression stayed level. "Then I'll use a harder one. The evidence supports fraud." The room went still inside me. Not because I was shocked. Because hearing the correct word out loud changes the temperature of memory. Fraude. Not irregularity. Not misunderstanding. Not family conflict. Fraude. I leaned back. Exhaled slowly. For years I had imagined that if this day ever came, it would feel triumphant. It didn't. It felt late. It felt administrative. It felt like being told the diagnosis after the damage had already spread through half your life. "What about criminal exposure?" I asked. "That would depend on referral and prosecutorial review." Marin said, "We are prepared to refer the matter." "What about Robert Hale?" Pierce looked at the table before answering. "He died last year." For a second I felt nothing. Then a blunt, flat anger. Dead. No deposition. No public discomfort. No chance to watch his own paperwork close around him. Some men injure people through systems and die before the systems answer back. That is not tragic. It is convenient. For him, I said. Pierce did not defend the dead. That may have been the first truly decent thing he did in my presence. We spent the next 2 hours going through everything. Every date. Every gap in custody. Every recovered email. Every possible procedural step. I learned that Beverly Sloan had tried to raise concerns before retirement and had been brushed aside by a partner who accepted Hale's explanation that post-death family dynamics were producing volatility. Volatility. Meaning me. My grief had been translated into office language and filed as a nuisance. I learned that the surviving witness, Thomas Vickery, had admitted in writing that he signed after hours, at Hale's request, without seeing my father sign any testamentary document. I learned that Celeste had emailed Hale repeatedly in the months before my father's death. One message read, "Daniel gets confused when Sienna is mentioned. We need this completed while he is calm." Another said, "He says he may want to revisit things." I reminded him what she has been like. Please advise the simplest path. The simplest path. I stared at that phrase so long it began to blur. That is who she was. Not overwhelmed widow. Not stressed caregiver. Project manager of theft. I asked the question I had been circling since I entered the building. Did my father know she had changed it? Marin chose her words carefully. We cannot prove how much he understood. or when. But the call logs and the notes suggest he had concerns about documents brought to him and wanted someone at the firm to review them. Unclear. That was the one part that still hurt. In a way, evidence couldn't soothe. Not knowing how much he knew. Not knowing whether he believed he still had time to fix it. Not knowing whether he died afraid. Justice can restore sequence. It cannot restore the final private weather inside a dying person's mind. Before I left, Marin outlined the next steps. Emergency petition. Asset tracing. Property review. Possible claims against Celeste. Potential civil exposure for the firm. Referral review for criminal investigation. I took notes. Asked dates. Asked what might become public. Asked what could still be unwound. At some point, Marin stopped speaking to me like a bereaved daughter and started speaking to me like a client capable of carrying weight. That steadied me more than sympathy would have. Then Andrew Pierce said, "There is one more thing you should be prepared for." I looked at him. What? If we move quickly, your stepmother may attempt to negotiate privately. I almost smiled. Of course she would. People who build their lives behind closed doors always rediscover privacy when daylight arrives. She won't want this on the record. I said, "No." Good. He looked at me for a second. Good? Yes. I said, "Because I do." That was the moment he understood I was not there simply to recover money. I was there to put shame back in the correct house. When I left Pierce and Lowell, Boston looked expensive and wet and indifferent. Umbrellas moved past in dark clusters. Taxis hissed through the slush. Some man in a navy overcoat laughed into his phone while crossing the street. Ordinary life always feels rude after revelation. I stood under the awning and called Maya first. She answered immediately. Well? I looked at my reflection in the glass. At the folder under my arm. At the city that had just handed me back one version of my father. I was right. I said, There was a pause. Then she answered softly, I know. Not I'm sorry. Not oh my God. Just I know. That was perfect. By the time I got home that evening, there were already 3 emails waiting. One from Marin with secure links. One from Pierce with a written summary. And one from Celeste. Subject line, We need to speak privately. Of course. I opened it. Naomi, I understand the firm has contacted you regarding certain concerns. I know this is upsetting. But there are explanations for things that may not appear straightforward on paper. Your father was under tremendous emotional strain. The last thing he would have wanted is a public spectacle. We should discuss this as family before outsiders distort grief into something ugly. There are explanations. As family. Before outsiders. The last thing he would have wanted. Every manipulation in perfect order. She still thought I was the same woman who had walked out of that first will reading, shaking and underfunded. She still thought tone could reduce me. I forwarded the email to Marin. Then, replied with 6 words. Future contact through counsel only. That was it. No speech. No accusation. No trembling. Just a closed door. Things moved quickly after that. Faster than truth had moved the first time. That was another thing I learned. Institutions can move with astonishing speed once they decide the right person is finally worth believing. Within days, filings were drafted. Within 2 weeks, a petition was submitted to reopen the estate issues tied to the later instrument. There were requests to preserve property interests and prevent further movement of contested assets. Julian, it turned out, had burned through most of the lump sum in less than 3 years. Failed ventures. One short-lived marine apparel brand. A lease on a downtown office he did not need. A boat he could not maintain. There is no investor more reckless than a man spending money he mistakes for proof of character. The house, though, was still Celeste's center of gravity. Refinanced once. Renovated. Used as collateral for status. Marin warned me immediately. Real property recovery is rarely clean. I don't need clean, I said. I need accurate. She gave me a small nod. That became our shared language. Not revenge. Not closure. Accuracy. By the 3rd week, Fairhaven Cove was already talking. I could feel it before anyone said so. That town runs on pressure changes. A silence at the bakery. A longer look from the pharmacist. One old neighbor suddenly liking a photo on social media after 4 years of polite disappearance. Then Mr. Tolland called. My father's old friend. Retired marine electrician. Hands like rope and the rare kind of gentleness men, his age almost never announce. Kiddo, he said. He had always called me that. Looks like the tide's turning. I sat on my balcony with my coat around my shoulders and the river wind pushing cold under the doorframe. What have you heard? That papers got served? Celeste says it's a misunderstanding. Julian says lawyers make trouble to make money. Which, coming from him, is rich? I laughed despite myself. Is anyone buying it? He paused, then said, No. That one word steadied something in me. Not because public opinion is justice, because lies survive best when everyone agrees to help them stay elegant. That agreement was cracking. The first hearing was preliminary, not trial, not final resolution. Just enough to bring everyone into one room and force the false story to wear a name tag. The courthouse in Bristol County was smaller and uglier than I expected. Fluorescent lights. Security bins. Coffee that smelled like wet cardboard. Legal sorrow always happens in the least poetic buildings. Marin met me outside courtroom 4. Celeste is here, she said. Julian? Yes. I nodded. My body had gone strangely calm. Not numb. Focused. I had lived with their version of events for 6 years. They were only just being asked to stand next to mine. Celeste was already seated when we entered. Pale blue suite. Silk scarf. Composed injury on her face. Not grief. Not fear. Injury. The look of a woman offended that consequences had become scheduled. Julian sat beside her in a navy suit. Face heavier than I remembered. Hairline retreating. Posture trying and failing to look expensive. Celeste saw me and stood. Marin touched my sleeve lightly. Not yet. But Celeste came toward us anyway. Of course she did. Naomi, she said in that low, urgent tone she always used when she wanted intimacy without accountability. Please, this is getting out of hand. I looked at her carefully. Older now. Still polished. still expecting the room to shape itself around her. "No?" I said, "It's finally in hand." She blinked once. "Your father would be horrified." That was the sentence she chose. Ownership of his imagined feelings. Even now. "You do not get to speak for him anymore," I said. The softness vanished from her face. For a second, I saw the colder structure underneath. "Be careful," she said quietly. "There are facts you don't understand." "Then you should be thrilled we're in court." Marin stepped between us with the kindest possible efficiency. "Further communication goes through counsel." Celeste gave a thin smile and returned to her table. Julian lingered half a second. "You always had to make things dramatic," he muttered. I looked at him. "No, I just stopped cleaning up after your mother." The hearing itself was procedural. Arguments about reopening, preservation, validity, discovery. The judge was a silver-haired woman in her 60s, with a face that made frivolous people speak more carefully. Marin laid out the earlier valid will. The witness problem. The notary gap. Beverly Sloane's statement. The emails. And the call log showing my father had tried to raise concerns. Celeste's attorney. Smooth and expensive, and deeply impressed with his own vocabulary. Argued that archived records required context, and that settled reliance interests should not be upended by delayed allegations. Reliance interests. That elegant phrase for people who built lives on stolen floors. The judge was not charmed. "Counsel," she said. "Your reliance argument is weakened if the court is satisfied that the later instrument may have been procured through fraud." May have been. Not enough for final judgment. Plenty for oxygen. Then came the first real crack. Marin summarized the surviving witness statement for the court. Thomas Vickery had signed as witness after hours at Hale's direction, without observing my father sign any will on that or any other occasion. The room changed. Not loudly. Morally. I looked at Celeste. Her jaw had locked so hard a muscle flicked once near her temple. Julian stared at the table. Good. Let him finally meet something solid. The judge ordered expedited discovery, preservation of disputed interests, and a follow-up hearing date. Not victory, but direction. And sometimes direction is the first real mercy. Outside the courtroom, under fluorescent hallway light, Celeste tried again. This time she dropped the soft family tone faster. "You think this brings him back?" she asked. "No." "You think this changes how he felt?" I laughed once. "Still doing that?" Her eyes sharpened. "You were gone," she snapped. "You were always gone. Work. Cities. Excuse. I was there. I took care of him. I fed him. Bathed him. Sat with him. You made calls from somewhere else and called it love." That accusation worked because part of it was true. I was not there every day. I did live elsewhere. I did miss moments. That is why lies wrapped around partial truth travel so easily. I answered carefully. "Yes, you were there." I said, "And you used being there as leverage?" Her nostrils flared. "You have no idea what that time was like." "I know exactly what it was like." I said, "I know what it's like to be included in logistics and excluded from tenderness. I know what it's like to be told not to come, and later hear who did. I know what it's like to sit in a law office, after a man dies and hear a paragraph written in a language he never used. She took one step toward me. Not enough to matter legally. Enough to show herself. You ungrateful little... She stopped because a court officer looked directly at us. The mask snapped back over her face so fast it was almost impressive. Almost. She turned and walked away. Julian followed. That should have been the biggest public moment. It wasn't. The bigger one came later that day in the parking garage. Maya had driven down and was waiting near my car because she understood that courthouse days can empty a person out. We were halfway across the garage when we heard voices. Celeste. Julian. Arguing. Not at us. At each other. Concrete carries sound in ugly ways. You told me Hale said it was handled. Julian hissed. It was handled until she pushed. She didn't push for 5 years. Because she had no proof. Maya looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us moved. Then Julian said the sentence that turned my blood cold. You said the old one was destroyed. Celeste answered too quickly. I was told it would never surface. Not denial. Not confusion. I stepped around the concrete pillar before I had really decided to. They both froze when they saw me. The look on Celeste's face in that moment was worth more than most of the money she stole. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The exact second a liar understands the room has stopped protecting her. You should lower your voice. I said. Garage's echo. Julian went pale. Celeste recovered first. Of course. You were eavesdropping. No. I said, you were broadcasting. Maya was already calling Marin. Bless her. Julian rubbed both hands over his face. He looked less arrogant now. More frightened. For the first time. I think. He understood that recklessness in the presence of consequence isn't charisma. It's exposure. Celeste turned to him with open contempt. Get in the car. He didn't move. That surprised me more than anything else. Did you forge it? He asked her. Not the will. It, as if even now he could not bear the noun. She stared at him. Then at me. Then did exactly what people like her always do when the center gives way. She attacked the debt. After everything I did for you, she said to him. Not no. Not that's absurd. Just emotional bookkeeping. Julian looked sick. I almost pitied him. Almost. Then I remembered his call after the first will reading. Dad made choices. No, let him stand in the weather now. Marin called back within minutes and told me to email myself a contemporaneous note immediately with exact phrasing. Time. Location. And witnesses. I did it right there in the garage. Hands shaking. Maya repeating the lines back to me, so I got them exactly right. You said the old one was destroyed. I was told it would never surface. Not final proof by itself. But corroboration. And corroboration is how truth survives people who keep trying to cut it into harmless pieces. The next few months were brutal. Not dramatic. Brutal. Discovery is tedious in the most exhausting possible way. Financial tracing. Deposition schedules. Property review. Email recovery. Medical records. Capacity arguments. I had to sit in conference rooms while lawyers discussed my father's decline in bullet points. Appétit poor. Cognition variable under medication. Fatigue severe. No daughter should have to hear a man she loved translated into leverage. Celeste was deposed first. Man let me attend. 4 hours in a conference room with bad coffee and a vent that blew too cold. Celeste arrived in dove gray with a leather folder and the face of a woman still trying to control the ending through posture. She lied carefully at first. Then less carefully. Then, stupidly. She said my father personally directed every change. Couldn't explain why the earlier will matched his historical planning language and the later one did not. Said she never saw an earlier will. Then was shown an email from Hale referencing Daniel's prior structure. Said she had no idea how the witness process worked. Then was shown messages asking for the simplest path while my father was calm. At one point, Marin asked, "When you told Julian you believed the earlier will would not surface, what did you mean?" Celeste straightened in her chair. "I may have been speaking emotionally." Marin didn't even look up from her notes. "Emotionally specific. Ms. Mercer." That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was clever, because it was exact. Julian's deposition was worse. Charm first, confusion second, selective memory third, then self-pity. By hour 3, he admitted Celeste had told him after my father's death that I had been handled in the estate. Handled. That word sickened me. It also sickened the court reporter enough that she looked up. He also admitted he had once overheard my father object to changing what was already fair. There was that word again. Fair. Still turning up through the wreckage. The settlement offer came not long after. Of course it did. Once the truth becomes expensive enough, people rediscover compromise. Private mediation. Structured property resolution. Repayment schedules. A proposed confidentiality framework. Language framing the problem as estate administration defects. Administration defects. I stared at that phrase in Marin's office and felt something go cold. "Do you want my honest answer?" she asked. "Yes." "It's financially strong," she said. "It also launders the moral record." Exactly. That was the problem. Money without sequence. Repair without accuracy. What happens if I refuse? More cost. More delay. More public process. More risk. Possibly a better emotional record. Possibly a worse financial one. She folded her hands. The question is not what outcome is perfect. It's what ending you can live with. That was the right question. I asked for the night. Went home. Opened all the windows even though it was cold. Sat on my kitchen floor with my father's watch in one hand and the settlement summary in the other. Then I looked again at the memorandum from the earlier will. I do not wish any later pressure to disturb what is fair. Fair. Not theatrical. Not clean. Fair. At 9, the next morning I called Marin. "I'll settle on the structure." I said, "Not the language." She was quiet. Then, "Tell me." No fake neutrality. No administration defects. The later will gets recognized as invalid. The earlier one controls. My mother's charitable gift is funded in full. The property structure follows the valid plan. Julian's repayment obligations are memorialized. And I keep the right to speak truthfully about what happened. That narrows the chance of agreement. Then let it narrow. Another pause. Then she said, "All right." Negotiations dragged for days. Celeste resisted every phrase that implied knowledge, every phrase that implied agency, every phrase that put a clock on her comfort. But once sequence turns against people like that, every delay adds weight to the truth instead of reducing it. In the end, the resolution landed close enough to justice that I could accept it without feeling purchased. The later will was formally disclaimed as invalid. The earlier will governed distribution. The house was placed back into the trust structure my father had intended, with Celeste retaining a limited occupancy period under conditions before transfer. My mother's memorial charitable gift was funded in full ex libel usus. Julian's obligations were recorded and enforceable. And there was no gag clause preventing me from speaking truthfully. No family healing theater. No forced forgiveness language. No institutional perfume poured over rot. The final court appearance was brief. Painfully brief for something that had consumed 6 years of my life. Orders entered. Terms acknowledged. Next matter called. That was the legal ending. But the real ending happened outside on the courthouse steps. The day was bright for once. Vinde. A few local reporters had shown up because Fairhaven Cove had become just scandalous enough for regional attention. Celeste came out with her attorney and paused when someone asked about the estate dispute. She said, "This has been a painful family misunderstanding magnified by legal opportunism." I had not planned to speak. I truly hadn't. But when I heard misunderstanding, something in me stood up straight. A reporter turned. "Miss Merced, would you like to respond?" I looked at Celeste. Then at the courthouse behind us. Then at the microphones. And I said the only thing that mattered. This was not a misunderstanding. The wind pulled one strand of hair across my cheek. I tucked it back, kept my voice calm. My father executed a valid will while he was still able to do so properly. A later document was used after his decline, and that document has now been rejected. I spent years being told my grief was suspicion. It wasn't, it was recognition. Nobody moved. So I added one more sentence. I'm not interested in spectacle. I'm interested in accuracy. My father tried to be fair. The record now reflects that. Then I walked away. Not because I had more to say. Because I didn't. That was enough. Afterward, life did what it always does. It resumed. Monday still arrived. Emails still filled up. The grocery store still needed visiting. The river outside my condo still moved in the same indifferent way. But something fundamental had changed. Mr. Toland called and cried on the phone without apology. "Your dad would be proud," he said. I let that sit for a second, then answered, "I hope he'd be relieved." The charity tied to my mother's memorial gift sent a formal acknowledgement letter. I framed it, put it on my bookshelf next to one photo of my parents from before any of this. Before sickness. Before Celeste. Before a law office tried to rearrange the story. Julian emailed once. Subject line: "I never thought it would go this far." That was the whole message. No apology. Just amazement that actions can outlive confidence. I did not reply. Celeste never contacted me directly again. I heard through Old Town channels that she stepped down from 2 boards before being pushed and told people she had gone through a season of painful reframing. That phrase made me laugh out loud in my kitchen. Painful reframing. Yes, consequences often feel like that to the people who earn them. A few months later, I returned to Fairhaven Cove alone. Not for court. Not for confrontation. For the house. Trust administrators had arranged an access window before the longer-term transition work began. Celeste had already removed most personal things. The house smelled faintly of citrus polish and old wood when I opened the door. I stood in the foyer and listened. Houses sound different when they stop performing. I walked room by room. The living room. The sunroom. My father's study. Upstairs hall. The guest room that used to be mine. In the attic storage. Under holiday bins and a lamp no one was ever going to fix. I found the cedar trunk. Inside was my grandmother's yellow quilt. Folded carefully. A little musty. Still soft. Still mine. I sat down on the floor with it in my lap and cried harder than I had in court. Harder than at the hearing. Harder than when Pierce handed me the earlier will. Because institutional truth is one thing. Fabric is another. Paper can restore sequence. Objects restore touch. I stayed there a long time. Then I went downstairs and stood in the kitchen by the sink. Same window. Same yard. And for one impossible second, I could almost see my father rinsing coffee grounds. Half turned toward me, saying something ordinary about weather or gas or the drive back. That is what justice finally gave me. Not him back. Not time back. Just the ability to miss him cleanly again. That matters more than people think. Vindication does not erase grief. It removes contamination. I did not move into the house. People always ask that, as if repossession and belonging are the same. They aren't. Too much had happened there. Too much had been managed in those rooms. Later, when the trust terms allowed it, I sold the property. Carefully. To a family with 2 daughters and loud shoes, and the kind of honest chaos that leaves fingerprints on refrigerator handles. I used part of the proceeds to expand the memorial scholarship and charitable work in my mother's name. I used another part to pay off the mortgage on my condo. And with the rest, I did something that would have sounded small to anyone who has never lived under prolonged vigilance. I made my life easier. Better health insurance. A contractor, the same month the bathroom leaked. A dining table that fit 6 people. A week by the ocean with my phone off. Little dignities. Ease is holy after years of bracing. About a year later, Marin invited me to speak at a small legal ethics event in Boston. I almost declined. Then, I accepted. Because I wanted one room full of future lawyers to hear what paperwork does to a real human being when nobody in the chain chooses courage soon enough. I told them that systems do not become moral just because they are formal. That grief makes families vulnerable to the worst people in them. That women are especially easy to dismiss when they sound emotional in rooms trained to respect paper more than pattern. And that sometimes the sentence "this does not sound like him" is not denial. It is expertise born of love. Afterward, a young associate came up to me and said, "I never thought of a state law as a place where violence could hide." I looked at her and said, "That's because you were taught to imagine violence as loud." That may be the most important thing I learned. Not every brutality shouts. Some notarize. Some email. Some say family unit. Some say simplest path. Some wear pearls to hospitals and call exclusion practical. But quiet theft is still theft. Polished harm is still harm. And fairness delayed is still worth pursuing when delay is what finally gives it teeth. There is one last thing. A month after that ethics event, I received a small padded envelope at my office. No return address. Inside was my father's old key ring. House key. Shed key. One rusted key neither of us had ever identified, but he kept anyway because he insisted it probably belonged to something. There was a note, too. One sentence in handwriting I recognized from Julian's deposition corrections. I found these in one of my mother's boxes. I thought you should have them. No apology. Still none. Just the smallest available act of recognition. I held the keys in my palm for a long time. Metal warming slowly against skin. There are relationships too damaged for reconciliation and too alive for pure indifference. Julian lives in that category for me now. I do not hate him every day. That would be too intimate. I do not forgive him. In the glossy language people like to sell, that would be dishonest. I simply know where to place him. Outside? Not in my home. Not in my decisions. Not in the soft inner part of my life where trust sleeps. That is what boundary means when you finally grow into it. Not punishment. Placement. The right things in. The wrong things out? Sometimes people ask whether it was worth it. The years, the cost, the hearings, the reopening, the exhaustion. The answer is yes. Not because I got everything back. I didn't. You cannot get back 6 years. You cannot get back the original shape of grief. You cannot get back the version of my father's death untouched by suspicion. But you can refuse to let the false story become the official one. And that matters. It matters in public record. It matters in private memory. It matters in your own body. Because there is a cost to being erased on paper that survives money. And there is a different kind of peace in seeing the record corrected. Even late. Especially late. If you are listening to this, and somebody once told you that your pain was overreaction, that your instincts were drama, that your memory was bitterness, hear me clearly. Sometimes your body recognizes the truth long before the documents do. Sometimes proof arrives years after certainty. And when it does not make you wise all at once. It simply proves you were not crazy when it was loneliest. That is its own form of justice. My father once told me that wood warps slowly when moisture gets in and nobody checks the frame. At the time he was talking about a back door. Now I think he was accidentally talking about families. Damage enters quietly. By the time the bend is visible, everyone swears it happened all at once. It didn't. That lie warped slowly. That house did. That marriage did. So did I. For a while. And then, more slowly, I straightened. Not into the woman I had been before. She was too trusting, too eager to be reasonable in rooms designed to use reason against her. What came after was harder, clearer, less available for rearrangement. I think my father would have recognized her. I hope he would have. I know he would have recognized the word that carried me all the way through. Fair. Not easy. Not equal. Fair. And in the end, after all the hearings and documents and years and silence, that was what came back to me. Not revenge exactly. Not triumph. Just the record. Put right. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. And if you have ever had to rebuild your life after being quietly cut out of your own story, leave one word in the comments. Recognized. Because some of us know this feeling instantly, and some truths take years. But they still arrive.